So the temperatures have officially dropped, and even though it is a beautiful sunny day, it is cold enough to warrant ear protection and some thick clothing. I thought I would show you guys really quick how I do our cellar garden and how I get it ready for the winter and make my life easier in the spring. I've told friends this before, and they always giggle when I say this, but it's true. You will be younger now than you will be in the spring. So it makes sense to get your work done when you are 6 months younger or so than if you wait until you are older in the spring. Plus, right now, most of us have been doing all the homestead work. We've been doing all the canning and prep work and gardening for the summer, so our bodies are really strong. Then winter comes and we sit around and we do reading and research and creative things, lazy things in the wintertime. And not to say that we're not busy, it's just very different. And for me personally, when I have sat all winter long and not done any of the things that I normally do all summer long, then I get sore in the spring. I get tired. Now, I do choose to do like typical exercise and yoga and things like that to keep up my body strength, but it's just not quite the same. So I like to do this. I'm going to share my tips with you guys on how to actually prep your gardens now. So fall is here. We've had our first frost, and today actually is the very first time we've had a full-on killing frost. It was pretty cold. It was about 30, maybe 29 or 30 degrees this morning. And so it's time to go ahead and get this done. The weather will be shifting. We're not going to have this beautiful weather for too much longer. So I thought we'd take advantage of the time we have. Now, this garden was initially a really weedy lawn. It wasn't great, didn't have great grass in it, had a lot of just nasty weeds in it, and I decided to put it in and make the most out of it. So I had no intention of keeping this garden going for a long period of time. Actually, where I'm sitting right now should have been a gigantic mountain because we were going to have a root cellar put in. And in the long run, what happened was I actually ended up just deciding I like this much space for gardening. I need to grow more food, and it would be better to have a root cellar where we could actually plow and not have to do extra plowing and shoveling and whatnot. So the decision was made within the first season of having this garden. I just decided this is going to be better. So this garden is located not too far from my door. Now, most of the time what you would do, especially in permaculture, is that you would put a really high maintenance garden right outside your door because it needs to be weeded, it needs to be monitored. That's not really the nature of this garden, and I am working to switch some of that stuff and bring in more high maintenance crops closer to the door, but I'm also working on just reducing my workload in general. So what I've done in this garden that's quite different than the rest of the garden is I have gone with more of a market style rows where it focuses really heavy on production rather than diversity. So I have surrounded this garden by all the diversity possible, but in here we use black agriculture fabric. We tilled it the first time. Oh, sorry, my nose is running because it's cold. I went ahead and had this garden tilled with a big tractor the very first time we put it in, and then we hauled in compost off-site because I wanted to make sure it would be very, very productive in its first season. And if you guys have been building like back to Eden style gardens and things like that, you're looking into that, this is not how they recommend starting that. You typically would start that by laying down a layer of cardboard or newspaper and then building on top of that. Well, because I put this garden in 2020, we didn't have time to wait. And in fact, we didn't even decide to put this garden in until the spring of 2020 when everything was kind of going crazy. And so we needed food production really quickly. I had access to a friend who was willing to come and till it for me and also give me the compost I needed to give this a big boost. So that was the first season. I laid down some typical landscaping fabric. Don't do that. I don't recommend it at all. I'm still pulling out pieces that have just gotten like weathered by the sun, and it basically fell apart in a month. It was terrible and not the right stuff. What you want is the woven black agriculture fabric. It's like a plastic slash fabric, and it's very heavy duty and the sun doesn't degrade it. So basically the fall of 2020, I decided, yep, I'm gonna keep this garden. I'm gonna go ahead and utilize this space. So I started something a little bit different out here where I wanted to still utilize the benefits of Back to Eden gardening, but I mixed it with something called Ruth Stout garden method. And basically that is straw or hay and you plant right in it. The thing is that, you know, when you're talking about planting that big of, you know, deep of straw, then your seeds kind of get lost in there. So I sort of put all of the garden methods together to create this garden and get the benefits, and it worked. It's worked really great. This garden is typically one of my most productive spaces, and we really don't spend a lot of time weeding it, which is really important when you are doing all the other things in life. So how do we do that? I'm going to show you my layers here and my plan for this year. It looks a little bit different every year, but I kind of want to just show you real quick, and then that way you guys can do this. I'm going to focus right now on putting together really helpful and useful videos, maybe a little bit less often, because I'm trying to come to a good place of balance in my own life, and things can be really complicated, but they don't always have to be. So this is a really simple way to get good production and not have to work so hard. It's worked really well for me. So let me just flip the camera and I'll show you kind of what our fall routine looks like. All right, so underneath this cardboard and newspaper is all this creeping grass. Now that's just gonna take over this whole garden if I don't do something about it. So we're gonna cover up all the holes like this, and this is going to be a path for next year. So we're gonna put this down and then we're gonna spray it with water, and then I'm gonna bury this in about 12 to 16 inches of thick wood chips, just like we have done right here. So this was just like that. This stuff here coming through, we will probably just pull it out, but we'll make sure that there is no grass sticking out by the time we cover this in wood chips, because otherwise what will happen is that this will just thrive and it won't actually smother it out. So that's the first step, is to look for any areas that have gotten out of control like this and just start totally from scratch. And I have found the best way is to make that my walkway for next year, because in the spring we will lay down our black agricultural fabric right on top of the wood chips, just like we did over here this last year. Now the next row over, this will be my planting row for next year. And what I've done is I took the old goat bedding out of the barn, and it's a lot, kind of part way broken down, but not all the way. Hi Kitty, thank you, you're so helpful. And basically this will break down all winter long, and this row will be ready for planting right in the spring, and it will need no prep work. So these, if you guys recall, were my rows of beans for this last year. And what I've decided is that instead of ripping the beans out, beans have a high nitrogen content. And so I thought, well, instead of taking that out, let's just go ahead and cover it and let this feed the ground. This is part of a sort of no-dig garden method. The goal in a no-dig garden is that you keep all the nutrients and the layers and the diversity and the soil structure all together. So you don't actually cut as many things out. You would just cut them off rather than ripping them out. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of that in this garden. So we have our planting row that's been covered in 4 to 6 inches of the goat bedding. And then I will cover the in-between rows, wherever it will be my walkway for next year will be wood chips. And then I have another row. So this is what the beans look like when they're completely covered with the straw. It just looks flat and even. I will have a little bit of overlap where some of the rows from this year will continue being rows for walking on next year. That's just sort of the way that this garden is going to work out this time. And then this is what it looks like before I've covered the beans. That's all the old beans that have been frosted and starting to break down already, and I will be covering this with either wood chips or straw. Now that's all the goat bedding that I had that's not broken down. This year I do have a little bit of rabbit bedding left that shouldn't be very broken down either, and I'll go ahead and add that on top of this row here. And then we're just going to continue that. So every other row will be wood chips and every other row will be either the goat bedding or the rabbit bedding. And if I run out, then I'm just going to add finished compost to the top of it. And what's going to happen is as soon as the snow melts and we have our ground not frozen, I will go get those rolls of black agriculture fabric and I will lay them on our walkways. This is going to heat the soil really quickly, so I can plant sooner out here. It will make it so that the weeds do not grow up in my path, and it will start prepping those beds for planting for the following year. So I have now done this since the fall of 2020, and it has just made excellent results for me. I've been able to grow squash and beans and peppers in this garden, tomatoes as well, and zinnias, like an extra month on my growing season just by using this method. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. If you have questions, leave it down in the comments for me. And if you do something similar to this, or you do no-dig gardening or back to Eden or some kind of variation on that, leave your tips for us down in the comments, because I know people are finding this really helpful. And you know, gardening in a cold climate where your season is so short, finding something that is not only easier but really proven is difficult. So this has been a lot of trial and error, finding what works and finding what doesn't work, but so far it's working really well. And you know, the proof to me is in the tomatoes. When you get ripe tomatoes in North Idaho, that's a big deal. And this year I was able to get about 4 boxes, which, considering how rough the start of the season was, I'm really happy with that. So yeah, I hope you guys continue to learn and grow, and I'll see you in the next one.